We are now being recorded for everyone's information, and we'll turn things back over to Tim.
Well, good morning. It's good to be with you all this morning and have this opportunity to talk with you about the Bible content exam. John, if you could make me a co-host, I will share a screen so I can put up a few slides as we start this morning. And the plan for this morning is to walk you through some information about the test and some kind of study strategies, and try to do that in fairly short order. And then take your questions and follow up to that. I will let you know that once I do start screen sharing with the arrangement that I have here, I'll be seeing slides and you'll be seeing slides and I will not be seeing you. So it won't do you any good for you to kind of wave at me and say, stop, can you answer a question for me right this second? I simply won't see it. So let me get through the slides and then I promise you we'll have some time for question and answer. So just kind of make a note of something or even put it in the chat. I won't see the chat while the slides are up, but they'll be kind of recorded there and we can take them up once we come back from that part of it. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. And then we will get started. So I'm going to talk this morning about the Bible content examination. Basically the way we're going to do this is to start by just kind of some background about the Bible content examination, what the purpose of the exam is and how the exam is set up and structured. And then we'll shift to talking about preparing to take the test and look at some specific preparation resources that are available to you and some preparation strategies that have proven helpful over the years. The Bible content exam is one of the 5 ordination examinations that are authorized by the General Assembly, required by the General Assembly under the Book of Order. And the General Assembly is the one that sets the parameters for the test. And the guidance that the Assembly has given to the Committee of the Church, the Presbyterian Cooperative Committee on Examinations for Candidates that develops the test, is that this test shall assess the candidate's knowledge of the form and content of the Bible. And that's really all the guidance that the General Assembly has given. And so it is then the responsibility of the PCC, the Presbyterian Cooperative Committee, to take that guidance then and then to kind of flesh that out. The structure of the exam has been pretty steady for the now some 50 years that it has been given. And for the PCC, they take that guidance to the General Assembly and say that the purpose then is to determine whether a person under care of a presbytery in the preparation for ministry process has the necessary familiarity with the scriptures that the church expects in its ministers of word and sacrament. And it goes about making this assessment by assessing the ability to answer questions about specific passages from across the scriptures to assess a general level of Bible knowledge. So there are a variety of ways that you could give a test like this. Its purpose is to test general knowledge. I could ask you to write an essay for me that would describe the basic historical and narrative arch of Samuel and Kings. I could ask you to write an essay comparing differences in the chronology between the Gospel of John and the Synoptic Gospels. So there's a variety of ways that I could do that. But the way the PCC has done this from the beginning is by asking questions about specific passages from across the scriptures, and from that then generalizing to what is your general level knowledge of the Bible, by asking questions of different levels of difficulty, things that they expect everybody should know, questions that they think would show a deeper knowledge of Scripture, a better command of Scripture, because they're more difficult, and so forth. The other thing that the PCC does is it says that this test then, because of the way that it is structured, can also provide some insight into the relative strengths and weaknesses in familiarity with different sections of the biblical canon. So depending on how you do on questions about the Pentateuch versus how you do about questions on the Gospels can give some insight to you and to your supervising committee with your presbytery into how likely it is that you know more about the Pentateuch or more about the Gospels. Now, the main way it does that then is because every BCE test has exactly the same distribution of questions. There are a total of 100 possible points on the test, and these points are distributed across 92 multiple choice questions that are worth 1 point apiece, and then 1 matching question from the Old Testament and 1 matching question from the New Testament, each of which have you match 5 things. So this could be 5 names with quotations. So you're matching the name of the person with the statement from the biblical text. Or it could be matching a key verse with a book of the Bible. And because there are then 5 basic points of information that are assessed by each matching question, those questions are worth 5 points apiece rather than 1. They are scored so that each piece is the same weight, so that you can get 3 out of 5 points. It's not an all or nothing, all 5 or nothing, which then raises some kind of strategic pieces in terms of test-taking strategy that I'll come back to later. But when we talk then about the distribution of the questions, we have to think about it in terms of points. So the Pentateuch will always be 17 of the 100 points. If one of the matching questions, if the matching question from the Old Testament comes from the Pentateuch, then there'll be 12 multiple choice questions and 1 matching question to get to those 17. So when we talk about the division, then it's always by points and not necessarily by questions because of where that matching question may fall. But again, the distribution is always 17% of the test will relate to the Pentateuch, 13% will relate to the historical books, which are Joshua through Esther. Then 10% will relate to Psalms and wisdom literature, so Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. And then 17% will relate to the prophets, so Isaiah through Malachi. Then in the New Testament, 18% of the test will be from the Gospels, 15% of the test will be from the book of Acts and then the Pauline letters, so Romans through Philemon. And then 10% of the test will be what the PCC, I think, rather inartfully refers to as the rest of the New Testament. So Hebrews through Revelation. Understand, I actually hold a PhD in biblical studies. I taught biblical studies and biblical languages for 20 years before I came into this position on university and seminary faculties, and so that in my area of specialization is the letter of James and the Catholic letters, so that they just simply get lumped together as the rest of the New Testament. Is kind of like fingernails on a chalkboard for me, but that's okay. I'll get over it, or maybe I won't. I've been doing this for a decade, and I still say that. But that's going to be the breakdown of how the test is set up. And so by then knowing that there are 17 points that are on the Pentateuch and 18 points or even 17 points exactly on the prophets, 18 points on the Gospels, you can kind of look. If you missed many more questions in the Pentateuch versus the number of questions that you missed relative to the same block in the prophets, it'll show you some information about your relative familiarity with those sections of the canon. That can be important in your overall preparation, because when you are choosing which elective courses to take in Bible, most people are going to choose their favorite books. So if you really like the prophets, you're looking forward to taking a course just on the prophets. But it may be more important to your preparation for you to take a course, an elective course on a different part of Scripture that you're less familiar with. Most of us are very familiar with our favorite parts of the Scripture or our favorite parts of certain writers and things of that nature. And so it can be important to your supervising committee to know these kind of relative strengths to help you as you're making your curricular choices as you go through your seminary studies. Now, the Bible content exam is just that. It is a test of your knowledge of the content of the Bible. It is not about interpretation of the text. There's a separate test in the sequence of 5 examinations that the General Assembly requires that deals with biblical interpretation and historical background of the text and those types of issues, and that's the exegesis exam. This test really is just about the content. And the PCC then defines that content, picking up on the definition and the requirement for the test already I've given you from the General Assembly, by saying it is a test about the stories, the themes, and the key passages. Now, of those three categories, stories, that's the one that's pretty obvious. We all know what a story is. We know what narratives are. We know the kind of questions that you get asked about that in any kind of educational setting. You know, what are the main events in the plot? Who are the main characters? What are important things that they say? So I want to talk more about themes and key passages. When we talk about themes, and this is one of the things that the General Assembly says that the test is required to cover, is your knowledge of themes of Scripture. One of the challenges is that themes are kind of necessarily an interpretive level. I mean, if I read Isaiah and I say, well, one of its themes is this, I have to kind of make an argument for that. And so it is in a kind of interpretive step. And so the PCC struggled with, okay, if it's to be about the content and not interpretation, but themes, how would you go at that, and how would you assess that? And so what the PCC has done in looking at themes is just say, okay, so what are the topics that recur repeatedly through the book? What are the things and the concerns that the writer of this particular biblical book has and gives the most attention to? It can't then ask a question, for example, describe one of the major themes of Isaiah and give the example, or give as the correct answer, deliverance from exile, because that's an interpretive description. So what they do is they find key verses that are that develop and establish that theme, and they might say, one question might be, comfort my people, and you know the rest of that verse talking about that your time, the time of your trial has been paid, and the restoration that is coming because of that comfort, and say, okay, what book does that come from? So, and you would be expected to say Isaiah, and it would, if they set up a question that way, this idea of deliverance from exile that is a comfort to God's people. The other books that would be put as options in that question would likely not deal with the exile at all. And so recognizing that this is a verse that talks about deliverance from exile, and that the only book that's in the list of options is Isaiah that deals with that, is how you would then make the connection. Or they might turn it around the other way. They might say that one of the major themes of the book of Isaiah is established by which of the following verses, and they would give you comfort my people, and then they would give you some other verses from other books that are not related to that theme. So that's how those questions are set up. Sometimes people look at these questions and they think, well, they just open a book, the Bible, let it fall open, put their finger down on a page and said, gee, where does this verse come from? That's not how those verses are chosen. They're chosen because they are key verses to understanding the theme of the book. We're going to come back to that in a moment to talk about some ways then that you can use that as a strategy for your preparation. Related to themes are key passages, both because key passages establish themes in the same way that passage about comforting God's people in Isaiah establishes a theme of that book. But they could also be key passages because they're key to other things. For example, scholars can debate how key it is that in Hosea, it talks about when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt have I called my son. You can argue about how central that is to Hosea, but it plays a very key passage in the birth story as Matthew tells it in the gospel. So sometimes passages are key passages, not necessarily because of the book where they're found, but because of the way that they're used elsewhere in the scriptural tradition. Or they might be key passages because of how they're used in the liturgical tradition of the church, or in the theological tradition of the church. So when you think about key passages, you want to even think about some things that might make them important because of they show up in a lot of the confessions. They're referred to in a lot of the book of Confessions, so they're referred to often in our liturgy. So that's the way that when the the PCC is looking for key passages to ask questions about, that's what they're looking at. So what are some resources then that you can use in your preparation? Well, the most important thing you can do is just read widely in the New Revised Standard Version. And the reason for the New Revised Standard Version is that when the PCC develops a test, all of the citations from the text are going to be in the English version of the edition of the test are going to be to the New Revised Standard Version. So even if you prefer, for whatever reasons, another translation, you want to get familiar with the language of the New Revised Standard Version, because that's the language you're going to see the citations from in the test. I recommend that you do that reading in a good study Bible, like the New Oxford Annotated Study Bible. I happen to like that one because I'm a contributor to that one. But any good study Bible, and look at the introductions to the books. Particularly if you're using a study Bible or a Bible dictionary that has outlines. I'll come back to that in a moment. But when you're looking at the introductions, look for their discussions of the themes of the book and the passages that establish them. So, for example, I mentioned that I contributed to the New Oxford Annotated Study Bible. I wrote the notes and the introduction for the letter of James in that, in the most recent editions. And one of the things that the general editor said, I want you to talk about the theme of the book. And so in the 1,000 words that I had to talk about that, I would say one of the themes of the book of James is a concern for those who are on the margins of the society in terms of social and economic terms. And then I would put in parentheses a series of verses that show that, in fact, that is a thing that recurs throughout the book. So James 1:21, true religion and undefiled before God is this, to care for widows and orphans in their distress and to keep oneself unstained from the world. The story about the rich man who comes into the assembly in chapter 2, the reference in chapter 5 about the wages that have been held back from the workers are crying out against the landowners in the day of judgment. Now, I wouldn't quote all of those because I've only got 1,000 words, but I would put the scripture references for them. So James 1:21, James 2:14-26, etc. What you want to do then is when you read in those introductions that this is a theme of the book and these are the verses that establish it, in preparing for the Bible content exam, you want to look up what are those verses that they're putting in parentheses. Both because those may be the very verses that will be chosen by the PCC in asking the questions, but also because they will familiarize yourself with the way that this biblical writer talks about those ideas and what are the key images and the key concepts that they use to talk about them. So there's a way to kind of reverse engineer the questions in your preparation. You're also going to want to look at outlines of the biblical book, simply to learn what's in this book. So where in all across 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, where are the stories about Solomon? Where are the stories about David? Where are the stories about Hezekiah? So that you can familiarize yourself with what the content is. If you're looking at the New Testament and you're looking at Paul's letters, where does Paul deal with the Lord's Supper? Where does Paul deal with the issue about offerings that have been made before idols? So and the outlines can help you to get that, so that when you see a question that's quoting something that touches on one of those topics, then that you will be able to recognize, oh yeah, that came up in Galatians. The allegory about Sarah and Hagar, that was in the outline for Galatians, so I know that that's the book that's talking about. So again, you're not going to want to take time in preparing for the BCE to wade into, did Paul write 2nd Thessalonians, or what was the historical setting that prompted the writing of the letter to the Romans? Those are questions that would come up in the exegesis exam. Here you want to focus on the content, the stories, themes, key passages, using the introductions to help you to focus on those concerns and not the others at this particular point. One other resource that you have available to you is the Equip website. When your Presbyterian enrolled you as an inquirer candidate, you received an email about how to register for the test and so forth. And from that site, using those credentials, you can log into the Equip site. And there you will find a summary presentation, again, of what we've talked about already this morning. You'll find some other guidance that the BCC is given about strategies for preparing for the test and a little more detail about its structure. But this is where you will also find a full-length practice BCE that you can take. And I would encourage you to do that. Take it and then see how you did on the different sections. And if you did really well on the Gospels and not so well on the Psalms and wisdom literature, then as you're preparing, you want to focus on those areas that you didn't do as well to give that more attention. You will also find there a complete archive of all of the questions that have been given in the online test since 2010. And after each round of tests, the new questions on the test that were developed for that are added to that archive. And so those archives are now complete up through the test that was just given in the Friday before Labor Day. And so you can review them and you can see, again, how is it that the PCC creates these questions and so forth. You'll want to look through them because some of those questions will be repeated on the test. There won't be so many of them repeated that you can pass the test simply by memorizing the answers to all the questions in the archive, but they will help you to prepare. They will help you as you work through them, both either in a quiz format or as a table that you can simply read. They're there in both structures. They will help you to say, okay, yeah, I'm recognizing most of these. Some of these I'm not doing so well on in this section of the canon. I need to give some more attention to that. So do take advantage of that. I will tell you as well that the archives there are complete in English, Korean, and in Spanish. So if you're going to be taking the tests in Korean or in Spanish, you've got that material there in that language as well. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen sharing here. I'm going to pop out the chat, though it doesn't look like anybody's put anything into the chat yet, and take your any questions that you have. Well, John, I guess I was perfectly clear. Nobody's got any questions?
I have just a question about the Equip site. I feel like I have made an account on here a long time ago, but I am not remembering.
So there's a couple ways that you can do it. If you remember your access to the exams website, exams.pcusa.org, which is where you'll register to take the test. Once you log onto that site, there'll actually be a link there that says Access Moodle Materials. And you can click that link and it will automatically log you in and you'll see the BCE that you're already registered for. I'll also mention to you that there is on the Equip site a preparation course for the senior ordination exams that does some very similar kinds of things, and you'll be able to enroll yourself in that when you get to that level of your preparation. But if you don't remember your credentials, or if you can't find that email that we sent you when your presbytery enrolled you at exams.pcusa.org, there is a forgot your password link there. You can click that. We'll send you put in your email. We'll send you an email with your username and a link to reset the password.
Yeah, that was a whole lot of unknown information to me. So, and I've been an inquirer for almost 2 years now with my presbytery. So what is this exams website? You spouted it out really fast, all of that, sure. And I don't have any of that. I'm sorry.
The internet address is exams, EXAMS, .pcusa.org. I think John's typing that into the chat for me. Yep, thank you, John.
Oops, sorry, I mistyped it.
Yeah, there's a C in there. So when your presbytery enrolls you as an inquirer candidate, you get an automated email, and I mean, it just kind of comes out of the blue. And so a lot of times people don't pay any attention to it, and because it's automated, depending on how highly set you have your filtering set, right, and how much stuff goes to junk, it may have got shifted into that. So you may not have seen it. So the first thing to try, if you don't recall, is simply go to that site and click that forgot your username and password, put in the email address that you gave to your presbytery. If you've got more than one, I know I've got more than one, right? So put in the email address that you use to communicate with your presbytery, because that's what they will have put into the system. If you don't get a message, again, check your junk. If you don't get a message back, you can check with me to see, and I can confirm that whether or not you actually have an account, you've been registered. If not, then your presbytery will need to register you so that your scores, both for this exam and for the senior exams later and all that, get properly aligned with your profile. You don't really want to create your own account at exams because you could end up with more than one account, and some of your records will be in one place and some of them in another. So be sure you're using the account that was set up for you by your presbytery.
So I guess I'm curious if you have any like statistics isn't the right word, but like I guess places like where people typically like mess up, or like places that people typically don't study enough, like those kinds of things. Like, I don't know, a lot of people don't study the prophets enough, and like, so make sure you do that, or I don't know, that kind of thing.
We don't see a lot of patterns of that across the whole population, right? The main thing is to just kind of step back and ask yourself, what are the parts of the scriptures that I feel the most familiar with? And take that practice test that's on the exams, on the Equip site, right? Take it and take the time to break it down. You know, how many points, what percentage of points did I get on the Pentateuch? What percentage of points did I get on the prophets? So, so that you know where you need to focus, because that really is a very individualized kind of pattern that we see. What we do find as a kind of statistical pattern is that if you grew up or have been for a period of years in a part of the church tradition where there was this kind of focus on working your way through the Bible and reading through it and studying through it, you're probably going to do well. If you grew up in a part of the church where the treatment of the Bible was very thematic, so you talked about poverty, or you talked about this issue, and then you talked about how Scripture speaks to it, those folks tend not to do as well because they don't think about this book more comprehensively. And so there may have been more focus on this is the idea about we don't hold back the wages from the poor, less focus on which book of the Bible did that come from. So kind of think about your own experience with the scriptures, how you learn scriptures within the life of the church. And, again, if you've had that kind of more thematic engagement, only hearing the scripture read is through the lectionary and worship, not a kind of Sunday school tradition that kind of took you through verse by verse, through entire books, then you're probably going to need to do a little more work than somebody who grew up in that more very Bible-centered kind of approach. So I'm seeing a couple of questions here in the chat. Louisville is not coming up as a teaching site, a testing site for this exam. That's correct. But you need to be in touch with Kylan Gray. The reason that LPTS is not on the testing site is because of the COVID restrictions that are in place on the campus. They cannot be permitting other people to come onto the campus to take the test. There is a limited number of seats that they will be providing, but you will need to register with Kylan as a special proctor to get one of those seats. And before you register, you need to talk to Kylan to be sure you got one of those seats. Okay? So now, again, if you're under Mid-Kentucky Care and you're not at LPTS, that's not going to be available to you. It's only to currently enrolled students who have the permission to be on the campus and have pre-cleared with Kylan Gray. And then once you do that, then you would actually register to take the test with Kylan as your special proctor. Okay? How much does it cost to take the test? Because of the pandemic right now, there is a reduced rate. So normally it costs $65 to register for the test. The PCC has lowered the cost to $40 because the PCC itself, since it is having to do all of its work remotely, a significant portion of the exam fee, not all of it, but a significant portion of it goes to cover the cost for the PCC to gather and meet. So they've said, listen, we're not going to have that expense in 2021 because we know we won't be able to meet in March, and they're passing all that savings along to you all. So the fee will only be $40 for the BCE and for the senior exams, at least through this program year and probably through the 2021-2022 program year. Okay, so Rebecca's telling me that Kylan's already filled all of his seats. So if that's the case, then you will have to find someone else to serve as a special proctor for you. We're all dealing with this. We've lost about 60% of our normal testing sites across the country because of pandemic restrictions. So we're getting a lot more tests by special proctor than we have in the past.
Tim, are there spaces around this region that people should know about so that just go?
Let me offer that, jump in here. I put it in the chat. Mid-Kentucky Presbytery is going to be hosting a BCE test site at Anchorage Presbyterian Church, which is here in Louisville, one of our Louisville churches. If you contact Doodle Harris, I put her email in the chat. She's the chair of our Commission on Preparation for Ministry. We can get you hooked up with Anchorage, and that will be a test site for both Mid-Kentucky Presbytery or any LPTS students or anybody else who happens to be in Louisville who wants to take the BCE and be proctored. The Anchorage is going to be using their sort of fellowship hall area, which is a very large room that should be able to accommodate easily 20 or so folks socially distanced. So please be aware of that.
Okay. Emily, did you have another question that wasn't part of what we just covered that was in the chat?
No, I was going to try and clarify those two things that,
okay,
we are full here at the LPTS campus, but that John and Doodle were working to have a second option if people hadn't registered through Jessica Bowman. I will say, yeah, all of the emails about the on-campus BCE, like Kylan will be our special proctor, but all of the emails have come from Jessica. And she has put in there anything that you need to register appropriately for a special proctor.
Another resource that I have added, and it's also in the chat, is walkthroughthebible.org. I know it tends to be a little bit more theologically conservative, but one thing that is great about being theologically conservative is that you learn the content of the Bible. You may not learn the themes very well or how to understand the historical critical method of it, but you will learn the stories. And Walk Through the Bible has courses and also a variety of other materials that you can purchase and or view that helps you get major themes of scripture, how it gets worked out chronologically. And it's just an offering there for you. Another thought back from the days when I took the Bible content exam, and because I was raised as a Southern Baptist, I didn't have any trouble passing it. But I can tell you that Bible trivia, Trivia Pursuit, Bible Edition, those type of games, they really help because they ask content type questions, not how do you understand it, but actual who is the mother of, right? Which is often helpful for Bible content exam.
You'll also see in the chat a book that was written by one of the professors at LPTS. I won't say more than just to point your attention to the chat. And the reason for that is the PCC is very careful. It does not recommend either specific websites like John has mentioned or specific books. The reason for that is they don't want to create a misimpression that if you know everything that's in that, you'll be fine. So I don't mention ever in representing the Presbyterian Cooperative Committee a specific book or a specific website. I will, again, another reason why I actually talk about the new annotated Oxford Annotated Study Bible is it doesn't have outlines. It's not one of the things that we were asked to do. But I do say you really need to look at study Bibles that have outlines. So, because the PCC wants to be very careful not to say study this book or study the resources on this website. It's a test about the Bible content, and so they don't recommend them. It's not to say that they don't think there's any value to them. They just don't want to create a misimpression that this is the official study guide for this test. There is no official study guide beyond the guidance that is in that equip course about how to prepare, and then the archive of the questions from the recent exams.
I had asked a couple other things in the chat. At the same time, I'd asked about the cost that if you said I missed, sorry.
Okay. So the test is available. I'm sorry, I caught the first bit and I didn't read through the end. So let me go back and pick up those other two. I see the questions here. The test is offered twice a year. It will next be given on, as we've mentioned, the first Friday of February, and registration is open now through December 31st. It will next be off. It's only given twice, and so the next time it will be offered will be on the Friday before Labor Day. And the registration period for that exam will be from June 1st to July 31st. So those are the 2 times a year. The other exams are offered 3 times a year on a slightly different schedule. But that's the 2 times for the Bible content exam. And you register for the exam at exams.pcusa.org. So when you go there during a registration period, you will have a link. Once you're logged into your profile, there'll be a link that you can click that says register for the exams. And then it will take you through. So there's 3 pages on the form that, selecting the exam, testing site, or providing special proctor, letting us know if you have special accommodations that have been approved. So for example, if you have dyslexia or other issues and you need extra time to take the BCE, you would request that during the registration process. And then your presbytery will authorize that accommodation for you when they authorize your registration. So that's where registration happens, is at exams.pcusa.org. Let me see if there's anything else in the chat. No, I'm not seeing anything else there. No.
There's also a good website, and I cannot remember the name of it for anything. Maybe Ken remembers, or Alyssa. It's got great graphics and kind of walks you through the Bible and all of the major themes and specifics to the Bible. I think Justin used it in Torah and Former Prophets one time. Is that ringing a bell to anybody?
I remember it, but I
cannot. As soon as I hear the name, I'll be like, oh, that's it.
There's the website that John mentioned earlier that I won't name. I know that 40 years ago, when I was kind of coming into this, I took one of their weekend conferences, and they do a lot of mnemonic devices and different things to help you kind of fix these things in your memory. I remember there was even, it was kind of like the song. There was like this song, creation, fall.
Right.
That was 40 years ago, and I still remember some of this. So there are a number of things that we'll try to provide those kind of things for you. So look around, find the things that are useful to you, and if those kind of things don't work for you, don't waste time on them. But if they are helpful to you, take advantage of it.
How helpful do you think it is to take the practice quizzes?
So the practice quizzes, there's a couple of things to understand about them. The PCC has set them up so that they exactly follow. If you're taking the quiz, it's exactly the same as if you were reading through the table. Mm-hmm. So you're going to get the questions every time in the same order with the options in the same order. Okay? Mm-hmm. Understand that when you take the test, if one of those questions is used, it will not, and by the way, they're also arranged in strict canonical sequence. So Genesis 1:1 question, Genesis 1:2 question, right? Right? When you take the test, they will not be in strict canonical order. And the software will scramble the options. So you may, in the table, or if you're taking the online quiz, you may have always seen that, oh, this question, the answer is B. And it doesn't matter how many times you go through the quiz, you take the practice quiz, it's always going to be B. But when you actually see it on the exam, it might be, that option may be D. So don't, be sure you're looking at what was the prompt and what's the response, not, oh, those 5 words is A. Because that will get you in real trouble. But beyond that, I think their main value, again, there are not going to be enough repeat questions that you can get a satisfactory score just by getting all of those right. Their main value is to help you to see how the PCC constructs these questions. How do they ask questions about themes? What are the kinds of questions that they ask? It can also be very helpful, again, beyond just the practice test. If you start looking at all, I think there's like 108 questions now in the gospel section, something like that. Well, actually in the gospel, I think it's more like 120. So beyond the 18 points on the practice test, if you do fairly well on those, but you start reading through that 120 set of questions and you're finding, I'm not doing as well overall with these as I did on this practice test, that may also give you some sense that, okay, I need to spend some more time on that. That's the main value of those archives. Understand how they set up questions, and then to further test, if you're reading it and you say, didn't have a clue, you told me the answer, I still don't have a clue. Okay, this is something I need to spend some more time on.
And could I also follow up with that from what Tim said? Spend time reading the actual epistle or the book. Don't spend time taking 5 more tests and looking for the questions that pertain just to that book. Read it actually. Right. You'll find that if you read it, that you will do better than if you try to memorize test questions and answers.
Right, and read it just with some discernment, right? When you look at the questions for the historical books, you're going to see that there are not questions in there about detailed questions about the genealogies in the first chapter of First Chronicles. But there might be a question about that there are 9 chapters of genealogies at the beginning of First Chronicles. So when you start reading, you hit that stretch, you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time going through and reading and trying to memorize what tribe is in what order and all that, but just to recognize, wait, there's 9 chapters of genealogies here at the beginning of First Chronicles. What's that all about? Right? So, and again, if you come to something, as you're reading through it, and it's your favorite story out of the Gospels, and you know it well, feel free to kind of, okay, that's where that came up in here. Got it. I'm going to skip on and go on and read till I find something that seems less familiar. So be strategic about the way you do it.
And here's a quick, just pragmatic question. We have 2 hours to take the test, correct?
That's right. Most people will finish it in just over an hour. I was going to mention something about the strategy of matching tests. So thank you for kind of triggering that for me. Remember, those matching questions are worth 5 points apiece, and each point is scored independently. So if you know 3 of the 5, you've got a strategic option to make. If you can feel fairly confident that, yeah, it's probably the 2 I'm not sure about probably go one way or the other, go ahead and do that, and you may get 5 out of 5. But if you have 3 that you know and 2 you are completely clueless about, it's perfectly fine, and the system will let you put the same answer for both of those other 2. And at that point, you've locked in 4 points. Because they can't both be wrong. Okay?
That just blew my mind.
So understanding how the test is scored can give you, now again, if you don't know 3 of the 5, And again, if you have a strong sense, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure I know what these other two, how they would go, then you may want to go ahead and take, do the 5. But if they're just complete, you got 3 cold, and there's 2 you're clueless about, put the same answer for both of those other 2, and then you can be okay. I'm going to get 4 out of 5. And that's a 1-point difference in the end, which for most people won't make any difference. But and every time we give the test, there's usually about 130 to 150 people who take it, and we will always have at least 2 or 3 who score 69. And it's close, but not close enough. So just that one piece of strategy might be the point that you need.
Here's another pragmatic question. How many questions are on the test exactly?
There are exactly 92 questions. And that's sometimes every time we have a few people who haven't really picked up about how it's scored because of the matching. And so they're thinking there's going to be 100 questions, and they see question 92 and they panic. There should be 8 more questions to go. But it's 90 multiple choice, 2 matching. So 92 total questions and 100 possible points. And the matching points will just come up. The matching questions are not saved to the end or anything like that. They'll just come up in the Old Testament section or the New Testament section in the midst of everything else.
Can I ask like a follow-up, question on the mechanics of the site? Like, are you able to answer questions and go back to them, or skip questions and go back to them? Like, is that all? Okay.
Yes, and you can flag a question. So you can put a little flag and say, I want to go back and check that one before I submit. When you're on the Equip site doing the practice test, you're using exactly the same site and software you will use to do the actual test. So practice all of those things as well. Familiarize yourself how to set a flag. What will happen at the end when it says, okay, you've answered the last question, do you want to go back? And how do you recognize the ones that are in the list that you set a flag for? There's a couple of different ways that you can do it. One will be in the number. There'll just be a little flag in the number in the left-hand column. There'll also be a mark on the list of all the questions that you'll see. So there's lots of reasons to go to the Equip and take the practice test, including just getting yourself familiar with how the process works. Yeah, so somebody said, I kept getting better and better every time I took the practice test. Of course you do, because you're seeing the same questions over and over and over. So don't lull yourself into a false insecurity from that.
Just to clarify that, I wanted to say, like, to pass the exam, you have to have a 70, right?
That's right.
And so every time I took the practice exams, I got at least an 80. And then I practiced them a couple of times, and I did multiple exams and would go to 96 the next time. And then I felt like this past exam was just way harder than all of the practice.
Well, keep in mind that the practice test itself doesn't change. So the practice test that's on the site, it's exactly the same questions, exactly the same order every time. So doing that one multiple times, the main advantage is familiarizing yourself with how the software works. And as I said, on a Bible content exam, the number varies a little bit sometimes depending on whether there's a new matching question or multiple choice or whatever. But there's usually, out of that 92 questions, at least 50 to 55 of them are going to be new. So you will have seen some of them, but you will not have seen nearly enough, right? And so one of the things that can also make the actual exam seem more difficult than what you were doing in the practice that you were doing over and over is every time you keep going back through the list, you're seeing familiar things, and now you're getting a much higher, you're getting new stuff that you haven't already seen. And the questions themselves may not even be any harder. It's just that you haven't already seen them. Yeah, let's see. So, so, if you have a really strong memory, you may recognize that the the practice test, if you take it again, oh, wait, that was exactly like the first time. Just know that that's the case. The practice test is fixed. It never changes. The quiz format for the Pentateuch section is fixed. It never changes. That's not true of the actual test. It's going to move things around. They're not going to be in canonical order. It's going to move the options around. So just understand how the two. It's the same testing platform, but it's using different features in the different times that you're engaging the material.
Are there any other questions for Tim for this morning, either in the chat or verbally? Well, Tim, thank you so much for taking the
Yes,
time and being with the group today. I know you will be wishing them well on the BCE exam when they take it. And you're available should they have additional questions. I'm sure that you'd be glad to answer them. You can email them to Tim. And would you like to share your email?
Sure, I'll put that in the chat. There you go.
Tim, is there any question you would have thought we would have asked that didn't get asked?
These are the questions that I normally get when I do these kind of sessions at our seminaries, kind of the pragmatic ones and so forth. I think you all have, we've covered most of the ground this morning. Like I said, there's a little bit more detail in those materials that are on the Equip site than what we could cover just in the 10 minutes very quickly this morning. So do take some chance to look through those. One of the things that is in there is that we didn't talk about today. That's frankly because it's just easier to read it and kind of stop and think it through. But there's also information in there about how the PCC sets the difficulty of the questions. I mentioned just kind of in passing, there are some questions that they expect everybody should know, right? Who built the ark for all the animals in the flood? So there's just some really easy questions, or what they think are going to be really easy questions. We sometimes find that people miss those too. But then there are some that they really don't expect more than about 75% of people to get right. They really are trying to sort out and show the depth of knowledge. So but there's information in there about what percentage of questions on the test fall into three categories of, yeah, we expect everybody to get this. Everybody who passes gets a passing score should get these. And then here are some others that are really the kind of sort out questions to show the people who have a deeper knowledge, a broader knowledge than some of the others. So this is that kind of information. But I think the questions have been good this morning. And as John said, feel free to email me anytime. I will also tell you that if you just forget that or lose my personal one, if you email exams@pcusa.org, which should be simple enough to remember, that all of those emails come straight to me. So that's another way that you can get a hold of me. It's just exams@pcusa.org.
Well, Tim, thank you for being here with us today. I think if there are no further questions or comments, this will probably end our time. I'm going to stop the recording.